Our group two. We are reviewing chapter five. My name is Cole Christensen, and I will go ahead and get started. But we also have Zach, Spencer, Kaylin, Cassidy, Aaron, Bella, and Zoe that are going to be helping out with this. I'll go ahead and jump into the first topic, which is they pronouns. So the book says the use of they as a singular pronoun reflects how language evolves to include and respect non-binary and gender non-conforming identities. According to the book, pronoun use is one of the many ways that language resists and reshapes gender norms. The example of this that I put in here was about some public figures that have embraced this they them pronoun, in which there are people like Demi Lovato and Sam Smith. Uh, they have been embraced by this. And on the other hand, several states that have proposed or passed legislation limiting pronoun use in schools. This highlights that there remains this remains an issue that is debated on both sides. I find it interesting in my personal life as far as my career goes that I've worked for Hilton hotels for the past 15 to 20 years on and off. And when this was starting to become they them a thing, um, they they mandated that all employees have their pronouns put into their email. So it was a very simple thing. Some people didn't like it, but other people appreciated it. It really helped with email communication, not to misunderstand an individual. So the topics that we're going over, we talk about the power of language, right? So the next topic we're talking about is terministic screens. This refers, in the book it says, this refers to how language acts as a filter, shaping what we pay attention to and how we interpret it. The book goes on saying the words we choose reflect particular worldviews and direct attention toward certain meanings while deflecting others. The debates over this, one of them that I found was the biological male versus trans woman. News coverage reflect different deterministic screens, each framing gender identity through distinct ideological lenses. So it's very general, right? Like the biological male or the trans woman, instead of those terministic views that are coming out. The next language form is the patriarchal universe of discourse. This refers to the system of language, symbols, and meanings that reflect and reinforce male-centered perspectives and values. That's from the book, but it limits how people can think of or speak about gender by normalizing male experiences as default and marginalizing others. In the media, the coverage that labels women as emotional leaders while praising men as passionate reflects us as a patriarchal discourse that frames traits differently based on gender. So that a whole idea of a man being manly only because they're passionate, right? And then a woman is weak because they show emotion. This is definitely one that I don't like. I don't like that patriarchal view because I am more emotional than my wife, and we spend a lot of time fighting that as she has spent a longer time than me doing her career as a labor and delivery nurse and less time home, which I've been able to step in and do, which is why now later in life I'm returning to school later in life. The other thing is language can be used to oppress and uh, to suppress. So one of that is he man language, refers to the use of masculine terms like mankind or chairman as generic to all people, like it says in the book. Um, the interesting thing apart of this is in 2024, NASA received public criticism for referring to the upcoming Artemis 3 mission crew as manned, despite it including female astronauts, highlighting how gendered language still shapes public institutions. As I was reading about this, I had a moment where I was talking to my daughter, who very much so calls her sister bro every time, bro this, bro that. So it's a situation where in the language It's a slang where they call each other bro, right? But again, he-man language would make it so that female loses it, right? Because obviously my daughter is not a man and not a bro. She's a sister.
In addition to what has already been talked about, Chapter 5 also covered language that can be used to oppress and subordinate people, including previously mentioned he-man language, but I will be covering some other topics regarding that issue. For the first one, I'd like to cover semantic derogation. Semantic derogation occurs when two terms ought to represent parallel concepts, but one term is derogatory while the other is not. An example, the most commonly used example when explaining semantic derogation is the example of master versus mistress. While having a similar etymology and history of the word, they mean two different things, and gender-wise, it's consistent. Master meaning more masculine, and mistress meaning more feminine. It also refers to how two words that should be equal, one male, one female, end up with two very different meanings, and often very sexualized. In short, words for women over time end up gaining negative connotations, many times sexualized as well. The next thing I'll be covering is semantic polarization. Semantic polarization occurs when two parallel concepts are treated as though they were opposed, like opposite sexes. Lewetsky 107, page 107. And this is semantic polarization is when we describe men and women as using opposite words, as if they're two different species. The most common examples to think of when thinking of semantic polarization is strong versus weak, rational versus emotional. For example, men are perceived to be more rational when women are supposed to be believed to make more emotional decisions, for example. But in short, semantic polarization uses language to explain one gender while also negatively comparing it to the other one, normally inciting differential reinforcement or treatment. The program I will cover is called semantic imbalance. Semantic imbalance refers to an overabundance of terms to describe something related to one group, but few terms existing to describe the other. The example I used for this slide is there are far more words to explain a sexually active woman than a man, and they are greatly used by both genders. For example, the words slut or whore were outlined in the book, and when we hear these words, we only think of women, or tend to think of women in those with relation to the term. In short, there is a semantic imbalance between the amount of negative words for one gender than another. The next slide I will cover is marked, unmarked terms. Marked and unmarked terms occur when someone combines an indicator of a person's sex or race or other identity ingredient with a noun, in some cases, but not at all. When one sex or race tends to dominate a category, people may sex or race mark the category only when a non-dominant person does it. And this is from Lewetsky, page 107. The example I used to describe marked or unmarked terms is a common one. We hear it all the time. For example, we have a male nurse. Put noun of male before nurse to describe that. It's a deviation from the norm. Because nurses are typically women, or believed to be for women. The other examples I included are black professor, female doctor. There tend to be slight deviations from the norm, and when you use marked or unmarked terms, you are explaining and saying that person or situation is outside the norm. The next and final topic I will cover is trivialization. Trivialization refers to the use of diminutives to refer to a disempowered group member. For example, black men, we used to call black men boys to denigrate their manly status of being a man, call them a boy, and not make them feel like humans. We're calling full-grown adult women girls. It's demoralizing and demeaning. Like I said, it can demean and belittle groups of people and the work that they've done to get where they are.
The term naming refers to the practice of surrounding use of proper nouns per individual, such as Mr., Mrs., Doctor, Coach, Miss, Professor. Lack of vocabulary. This term refers to the lack of words that can describe elements of reality. Example, the name of body parts such as nose, ears, eyes, tongue, etc. Why might this be of concern? Lawrence explained, leaving something unnamed making it quite literally unspeakable. The truncated passive. Grammatical patterns provide evidence of sexism in language because they enable speakers to deny agency and perpetuate oppression. Julia Penelope is the truncated passive, in which the use of a passive verb allows the agent action to be deleted from the sentence. Some examples are John beat Mary. Mary was beaten by John. Mary was beaten. Mary was battered. They are active voice, passive voice. Final two were truncative passive. Falsely universal we. Political scientist Jane Mansbring in 1998 identified this term, which key points are the term erases dissent and diversity. The term also is used for justifying policies and decisions that can exclude or harm various groups. The deverbing of woman. Its definition, the verb woman included become woman-like, with it to behave as a woman, to be womanly, to make a woman in weakness or subservience, to make a woman of deprived of virginity, to furnish or provide with woman. The deverbing of woman occurs because today, in contrast to the verb man, the word woman is seldom thought of as a verb at all.
So far, we have heard how specific parts of language can construct sex privilege. Now I will dive into using language as violence, such as hate speech. Now, there are different types of hate speech, such as being racist, homophobic, sexist, and even speaking towards having a religious intolerance. But hate speech is more than just offensive. It can be silencing and cause psychological fear and more. There was an interesting point that the textbooks mentions about the First Amendment and an argument about how speech is protected, but then how does hate speech go in? And legal scholar Mari Matsuda recommends we not only consider the rights of the speaker, but also the impact on the listener. There are relationships between naming and reality, and knowledge and power. But there are solutions and ways for you to be more inclusive in your speech so you're not using language as violence. Now, if you use language that injures another, you should apologize and learn. Indicate that you recognize the injury made and seek to apologize or make amends for that. Another important part is being proactive and outlining how you plan to avoid making that same mistake again. Now, language as resistance. Language is power. Through language, people can rename, re-envision, and reimagine the world because language is power in ways more literal than most people think. When we speak, we exercise the power of language to transform reality. I think that was a super powerful quote because there is a reason that we are here studying communication, specifically even gender communication, because language is power and how we communicate that language can be really impactful in either a positive way or a negative way. And speaking of that positive or negative way, language has the power to create inequality and injustice, but it also has the power to resist them. And I think perception plays a really large role in communication. It's a lot also about not only what is said, but what is perceived by what is said. Now, talking back is not just talking for talk's sake, but is the expression of our movement from object to subject, the liberated voice. And this means that the subject is not just being frustrated or defiant, the subject is reclaiming identity and also agency. This also means moving from an object, which is someone spoken or ignored, to a subject, meaning someone who has thoughts and power and voice. Something that's interesting is that social location really affects whether your voice is heard and acknowledged. So another way to say that is there could be two different people, different genders, different race, and they can say the same thing, but only one of those people may be taken seriously or even in a positive manner, and the other one could have been looked down upon. There is a distinction between ordinary talk and talking back, and that is necessary to know for three reasons. One, it avoids trivializing or romanticizing the process of finding a voice. It also avoids privileging acts of speaking over the content of the speech, meaning what is said matters. And lastly, it prevents the commodification of oppositional voices, which means when you recognize the oppositional element of talking back, you can no longer treat that as just a show or a performance. Like, you have to recognize that. Now, developing new language refers to the creation of vocabulary, phrases, and idioms to describe social reality. I think it's important to know that new words enable people to see new social realities, or it can even provide names for a person's experience. When we make new language, we start to see and understand the world differently. And also, when those in marginalized groups describe their own lives in their own terms, it helps them take back power. And it's important to note that some have to fight for the right to share their experiences and stories, especially in their own words. And for some, naming their own experience is a way to survive and be heard. There's an interesting story that an example that the textbooks mentions that more than 1,000 years ago, women in China developed nushu, a female discourse used in texts sung and chanted by rural women over their needlework on pieces of red fabric, handkerchiefs, and fans. Because Chinese women were excluded from formal education in Hanzi, the official Chinese script that was created by men for the use of men. Now, nushu was developed in an area where men dominated women, and the text described the details of a woman's life and expressed feelings about sexual inequality, low social status, and bad treatment. Men could understand it, but could not perform it, read it, speak it for themselves. So this allowed women to have a voice and give importance to their lives. One thing, there was a quote in this after this example, and it really stuck out to me. It says that it transformed the hardships of women into tales that validated their lives and experiences. And I think that one sentence really captures everything that the section on developing new language was referencing and trying to explain. Now, resignification refers to the linguistic practice in which you reject a term's existing meaning's normative power, expose how the term's meaning was constructed, and attempt to change its connotation. Now, it's important to know the difference between denotations and connotations, where denotations is the thing to which it refers, and connotations are the emotional resonances embedded within a term's meaning. Now, here are some examples of resignification. One was a movement called slut walks, where in this movement, there were women who were renaming the word slut to protest slut shaming and victim blaming. There was also an example called the Slants, which was an Asian American band, and they challenged stereotypes, specifically a stereotype that Asian Americans have slanted eyes. Now, in those two examples, resignification was very positive because they're taking back the power to that word. But there are some challenges with resignification, meaning it can be really exclusive, whether you're meaning for it to be exclusive or not. It can exclude a group. There's also lots of disagreements. Some people will be trying to reclaim a word to have it have a more positive meaning, but some may argue that that word is meant to be disrespectful for a reason and it shouldn't be referenced in that way. It's also important to know that there may be history behind that word. So long ago, maybe that word didn't have a negative connotation. Maybe it was positive and meant to be a compliment. But over time, it turned to have a negative connotation. And another challenge is if a group is trying to reclaim a word, will it carry beyond just that group? So those are some of the interesting challenges of resignification.
Strategic essentialism refers to the intentional embrace and foregrounding of an identity ingredient as a definitive group of identity for a political purpose and has two important characteristics. One, so-called essential attributes of the group are defined by the group members themselves. And two, even as the group members engage in essentialism, they recognize that it is always an artificial construct. An example of this is during the Indian struggle for freedom, or how we call them Native Americans. They all, regardless of their religion, affiliation, whatever, they came together against the British colonial rule for independence. And then a rhetoric, or a rhetoric, is a verbal and written communication that is constructed to persuade, inform, or motivate. And the rhetoric of difference is the technique of using language effectively and persuasively in spoken or written form to identify with and across difference. Something from the book that stood out to me was when people speak as women, as people of color, as queer, as third world women, as indigenous people, they thematize their name identities to legitimize force of their rhetoric. And this just means they just take into account their identities and embrace them really and use it as a driving force for their story. If they're ways to persuade you. An example of this is when communication scholar Lisa Flores studied the development of a rhetorical and illustrated strategic essentialism in the form of rhetorics of difference. She examined how the Chicana feminist creative works participated in rhetorics of difference by creating a shared sense of identity and a figurative place where they belonged as Chicanas, distinct from the physical space between the United States and Mexico where they lived. Described by Chicana lesbian feminist Gloria Anzaldúa as where the third world breaks against the first and bleeds. Flores explained that because Chicana feminists live between worlds, physically unwanted in the United States and not wanting to return to Mexico, emotionally seeking the safety of family while seeking respect as women, they must create their own homeland. The next concept is moving over, and moving over refers to the conscious choice to silence oneself and create space for others to talk. This should not be taken as an excuse not to speak. When people with privilege, whether race, class, sex, nationality, or religion, may need to step aside, move over, and make space when others wish to speak. An example is the author Anne Cameron wrote first-person accounts of the lives of Native Canadian women. Lee Markle, a Canadian author of Salish and Cree ancestry and member of the Stolo Nation, was sent as a spokesperson for a group of writers who met and decided to ask Cameron to move over at the 1988 International Feminist Book Fair in Montreal. When asked, Cameron did indeed move over. The Native women's concern was that as long as whites writing as Native women filled stores' bookshelves, no room was left for Native women.
In chapter 5, we also talked about inclusive language that could be used. So instead of using words like guys or mankind, try saying folks, everyone, or humankind. I feel like it's a simple switch that includes more people. Next, when we talk about relationship status, words like bachelor can carry different tones. So it's better to just say single. It's neutral and avoids any negative connotation. We also want to avoid polarizing language like saying opposite sexes. Using terms like all sexes or different sexes is more inclusive and acknowledges diversity. Then there's semantic imbalance. That's when certain traits are kind of overemphasized for one group, like constantly focusing on women's sexuality while ignoring others. I think we should try to aim for a balanced representation in how we talk to other people and about other people. Also try to avoid marked terms like pointing out someone's gender, race, or sexuality unnecessarily. Instead, you can refer to people by their name, role, profession. For example, Jordan from marketing or the manager instead of things that point out their gender, race, things like that. And finally, I think for job titles, it's good to avoid outdated gendered terms like waitress or stewardess. Go with wait staff or server or flight attendant.
A conclusion to gather from this whole chapter is to be fair in the way you describe the world, giving all people recognition for their existence by avoiding an or falsely universal we and sexist language. Do not use violent language. When you use borrowed words from another, make sure you make clear where you found them. If your language is messy, imprecise, or causes messes because it was violent or used punctuated passives, clean up your language. If a term has a specific meaning as part of your culture, do not use it unless granted permission. If you ever hurt someone with your language, apologize. Sticks and stones may break bones, and words may break spirits. These are all from the book at the end of the chapter. They're to help you be concise and respectful when using your language. Also from the book, like this quote, said sometimes a person may use a term and not recognize that its meaning may have moved on. Mistakes do happen.